Welcome to today's presentation, How I Taught My Grandma Scrum. My name is Stephanie Cully, and I've been a Scrum Master for over 5 years. I learned Scrum about 10 years ago, and I can still remember back to my first time when I heard about Scrum and the role of a Scrum Master, and all I could think was, what the heck does Scrum stand for? What is a Scrum Master? There were so many different terms and jargon being thrown at me that it was really hard to understand from the very beginning. If you've learned Scrum or if you were in a similar situation, I'm sure you can relate. And I often find this look of confusion whenever I'm introduced to someone new and they ask me what I do and I tell them that I'm a Scrum Master. Well, over my years of being a Scrum Master and teaching others about what it is, I've learned quite a few tips. So I actually have 6 tips for you today if you're in the situation of wanting to teach someone Scrum and you want to be able to do it in a simple way. So let's start with really understanding how to teach someone what a Scrum Master is. There are a couple of key points that I want to point out, which is what not to say. Thinking back to my first days learning about what a Scrum Master was, I remember a ton of theory being thrown at me. This isn't to say that theory isn't important, but when you're teaching someone Scrum for the first time, if it's not in a class setting, theory really isn't the first thing that I would start with. The next thing is focusing too much on technology. We know that Scrum is not specific to software. Although a lot of companies are using Scrum to help them with software development, it can be used for pretty much anything that's complex and needs an easy way to be broken down. And then the last thing is I remember having so much jargon thrown at me that it was really hard to focus on what mattered when I was learning Scrum. So the first thing I would say is make sure if you're teaching someone Scrum that these are not the first things that you're starting with if you're just doing it in an informal setting. So I found it so easy to teach Scrum now that I've even been able to teach my grandmother. So let's rewind to many years ago when I was having a conversation with my grandmother. I was having a heartfelt conversation with my grandmother, and she was sharing some information about what she did on a day-to-day basis while she was raising my dad and the other members of her family. And soon the conversation turned over to me and she said, "Hey, Steph, I remember you saying that you're in IT, but I don't remember exactly what you said that you do." "I'm a Scrum Master, grandmother." "A Scrum what?" "It's a Scrum Master." So the easiest way to explain it is I work with a team, a Scrum team, and our goal is to deliver work. And I help protect the team, coach them, facilitate meetings, a whole host of things that I can help them with. And really the goal is for us to be able to deliver things more quickly, and I help them remove any blockers that are involved. I could start to see the look of confusion on her face as I started to explain it to her. So I decided to use a couple of tips that I still go back to now. The first thing is really knowing your audience. So the way that I'm going to teach Scrum to my grandmother is probably going to be a lot different than if I'm teaching it to someone that is in a leadership role that's already using technology versus if I had to explain it to someone who's working in a teaching environment. It's a lot easier to put it in the perspective of teaching or education. The next thing is making it relatable. Is there anything specific that they're interested in or a specific talking point that you know would make it easier to have this conversation? And then the last thing is focusing on the situation. Is it an informal conversation that you're having? If you're having an informal conversation with someone, they just want to know what you do in your day-to-day role, you can briefly explain that to them. But if it's someone who actually wants to use Scrum, then there's going to have to be a little bit more detail. But again, focus on the fact that you don't have to go too into the weeds when you're talking about theory and things like that. So back to the story about teaching my grandmother Scrum. I decided that I was going to look at my audience, which is my grandmother, make it a little bit more relatable and focus on that situation. So grandmother, do you remember several years ago when the kids used to love to come over to your house and play computer games? She definitely remembers this. So there was one particular game, Jeopardy, that we loved to play. And back in the day, we actually took it off of a CD-ROM, and we had to insert that. And that game that was developed, Grandmother, that took probably a year for the developers to put together. And it wasn't a very steady process. Whatever was there, by the time you release it, there's really no ability to make changes. Now let's fast forward to today, where there are, you have the way of the phone and phone apps. In today's day and age, it's so much easier to just be able to use Agile or Scrum, where rather than packaging things up within a year time frame, you're able to deliver something within like 1 or 2 weeks. So how much more beneficial would it have been if this if this framework was used to develop that Jeopardy game? Could have easily done the bare minimum that was required and released something within a couple of weeks. And then as the developers decided to add more and more things, like different game options or different features, those could slowly be released. I could see a light bulb go off in her head that it was definitely making sense at this point. And I told her, really the thing that I love about Scrum is that it doesn't have to just be used with technology. You can really use it in anything. So for instance, the fact that she had a house renovation project coming up, this would really be the perfect scenario to use Scrum. So I could tell she was incredibly interested in that. And she said, tell me more if possible. I think this would be a great approach to focus on our home renovation projects. So the first thing that I told her is that she'll be our official product owner. She can get all of the different requirements, all of the different ideas about the renovation projects, whether that's from my grandfather, from her kids, grandkids, but she's the one that organizes this list. She'll be the one that has to prioritize it and make sure we know exactly what it is that she's looking for. So she had a long laundry list of items that she wanted done on the house, and she was able to narrow it down. So I told her, this is your backlog. We're going to go through and understand what is the top priority thing that you're looking for, and we'll be able to do this break it down into smaller chunks. So your development team or Scrum team is going to consist of my grandfather, my dad, and my brother. So they'll all be there working together to accomplish this goal. So the first thing is actually the fence. So it's really important to her that she has the fence completed because she has a small dog and she's worried that the dog will get under some of the cracks of the existing fence. So the first thing that I told her we need to do is have a short refinement session where basically sit down with the people who are doing the work, so the Scrum team, and we can find out exactly what it is that she's looking for, and they can break down the work into smaller chunks so that we can get that done. So all of us sat down together at her kitchen table, my dad, my brother, my grandfather, and my grandmother. And she proceeded to tell us about the fence, what exactly it was that she was looking for. It had to be a white fence. It had to be tall enough so that the dog couldn't jump over it, white and wooden fence. And so they asked some more questions about it, tried to get some more details on the size, the exact look, location, and all of the other details. Once that was wrapped up, they were able to break the work down into smaller chunks. So basically ordering the fence, making sure that they dig a hole, taking down the old fence, all of those different details. So once they all agreed to the work that could be done, they decided that this would be done in 1 week increments. So by the end of that 1 week, my grandmother would have some type of finished product, and we would celebrate together at our family dinner every Sunday, which would basically be our sprint review. So off they went to start working on the fence. And they decided that every day around 9 a.m., they would have a quick stand-up meeting so that they can talk about how they're progressing towards their goals and talk about any blockers. So the first day went really well, but then the second day, we noticed that it was supposed to lightning storm all day. So they basically brought this up as a blocker that they wouldn't be able to work on the fence, but instead they could try to prioritize some other work. And since it was only my dad and my brother who were working on the fence, they decided in order to try to get the work done by Friday, my grandfather would stop working on demolition in another area and help him pick up the work on the fence the following day. So it was really great that they were able to work together as a team to try to complete that more quickly. So they continued to do their daily stand-up every day and work towards their goal. Finally, by Sunday, the fence was looking amazing and all of the family came over for a Sunday dinner, and my grandmother proudly showed everybody the fence and all of the work that the team had done, basically all the work that the family had done. So there was some feedback from family members about the color of the fence and also about the size, but overall it met the requirements that my grandmother was looking for and she was extremely happy. So she decided to take any feedback and let them know about the next project that was coming up. So she decided that the kitchen was the next highest priority item. So she took some feedback from my cousins, from family members. They definitely wanted to have an island. That way it was easier for them to talk to each other while she was cooking in the kitchen, while they were helping her. And also they decided that they wanted to take a wall down as well to make it a little bit more open space. So she noted down these ideas and then went back to her drawing board in preparation for the next sprint planning to find out what exactly it was that she thought was the highest priority. She also took this back to my family members who were working on the project to find out approximately how long it would take and any different risk and things associated with it. So they knew that the idea of taking down the wall could present some kind of risk, so they put that out there as an unknown, and that would take, they're estimating that to take longer. The other things as far as the island were straightforward. So they came together for the next sprint planning and decided that they'd work on the islands, they'd check into knocking down the wall, and then also retiling the floor. So again, the sprint started really well and things were going well when all of a sudden they noticed that there were some plumbing issues. So this was going to set them back a whole nother day. So me as a Scrum Master, I asked, what exactly is it that's going on with the plumbing, and is there anyone else that we need to bring in to help? So they decided in order to get this done that they would have to take a break from some of the other things that they were working on. So they'd actually have to put the taking out the wall on the back burner. So this would have to get pushed out to another sprint. So they all worked together, got the plumbing issue underway, and they still had time to do the retiling and be able to put the island in. So again, at the end of the week on Sunday, my grandmother again had everybody over for Sunday dinner, and she talked about how ecstatic she was and basically told everybody we ran into some hiccups. So things like plumbing popped up, we weren't able to knock out a wall, but we were able to get all of these other features in here that we were looking for. And what the family members decided to do as well is do a quick retrospective. So with the retrospective, they decided to talk at Sunday dinner, and really it was focused on the people that were doing the work. So my grandfather, my father, and my brother. And they basically talked about from some of the previous things, like making sure that they check into any plumbing issues ahead of time, checking out any other types of issues that could be wrong with the house before starting on a project. They felt that they worked really well together and also loved the fact that they were collaborating so well and pitching in when someone needed help with something. So this continued for several weeks, and eventually my grandmother was able to get all of the things that she was looking for. She learned that she couldn't have everything all at once, but the great thing was that by doing things in small chunks and by having members of the team work together, that they were able to achieve a lot more within a short period of time. So if we fast forward to some of the things that I talked about and how I find it beneficial to teach people Scrum, the first thing is really using a live example. So you have to go back to the fact that you have to look at your situation. So if this is a brief conversation, you're not going to have time to go over a live example. But if this is someone that you're going to be working with and someone that's interested in working on a Scrum project, for instance, maybe you're helping for a volunteer organization and you'd like to introduce something like Scrum, it's perfect to actually use a live example because people learn so much better by doing than just learning theory. The next thing that I wanted to say is focusing on collaboration. One of the most important things about Scrum is that it's not people just going off and doing work individually by themselves. There's really that whole team element. And you could see by weaving those examples into the story, my grandmother was able to see the importance of collaboration, whether that was them understanding what exactly it was that she was looking for, her being able to provide feedback, and also everybody working very closely together to get the work done. Lastly, making it user-centered. So you're always checking in with my grandmother to make sure that things were looking good. They always had her in mind. So when things like plumbing pops up, yeah, it's amazing to be able to get a new, new backsplash tiles, whatever the case may be, but focusing on the user and what's most important is really a huge aspect to Scrum. So I hope these were helpful examples for you to understand how to break down Scrum, whether it's trying to explain it to your own 5-year-old, trying to explain it to someone that you're working with a project on, or even your own grandmother. It's really important to focus on the basics and not go too into the details. As you noticed in my example, I didn't have to go into all of the different theory, didn't have to talk about every single event necessarily, but the more and more someone is getting to work on Scrum, the more that you can start to share some of the theory and more of the examples. Again, thanks so much for listening to this presentation. I look forward to talking to you in the Q&A section. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out, Stephanie@scrumlifeconsulting.com. Thanks so much.